So I wanna make this video because I need to make this video. So hopefully the psychologists, counselors, supporters that can all assist my mother with everything that has happened with this whole story of my mother being ran over by a forklift. And one of the reasons that I talked about that my mother, like when her boyfriend showed up to the house, that he had said that someone had tried going into the room. One of the guy that I worked for, because the conflict, I didn't have like conflict, but this guy didn't like me. This guy was like just didn't care. This guy was like ruthless. And I was 18 years old, and I said I walked into Employee Solutions, and he was a really heavy set guy, drove a big pickup truck, and he was like, "Oh, you're Celestina's son that got ran over by a forklift." And he didn't know that until I said something. He goes, "You're Palomo? You're Celestina's son?" He goes, "Yeah, that's my mom." And he was the guy that I was told that went into my mother's hospital bed when my mother just got out of surgery and was not comatose, but was placed on all sorts of intense medication, and she was like lost. She just didn't know, like she was all drugged up. And the guy tried to get her to sign the paperwork to never sue the company, because the first thing that when you have an accident like that, you're probably going to get paid a lot of money. You're going to be able to sue the company that ran over your forklift because you don't know if the person had a forklift license. I don't know. I want to say, I don't know. Julian told me that the guy didn't have a forklift license, would be at fault of the company. But I was told she was picking up an oil spill off the ground, and that's how it happened. She had her, I think, her back faced, so she couldn't see what was going on, and the guy wasn't paying attention. And this is whenever he ran over her leg, and I already went into details of that. So, she screamed. My aunt, my mother's sister, heard the scream and rode in the ambulance to the hospital with my mom. And Julian told me this. Julian told me that she was fighting with, like, they said, "You can't come with us," and I don't know what the mandatory rules they have in ambulances, whether you can go into the paramedics when a tragic something like that happens. But they were telling her she could, and she forced herself, saying, "No, this is my sister." And that's what I want to say. Julian, you could talk to Julian about this. He told me this. So Lucio, my mom's boyfriend, was the one that told this is what he said. Now, I don't necessarily, I necessarily don't believe it. But he had said that she ended up, he kind of jumped in the middle of it and said, "No, don't sign the paperwork, whatever." And so she didn't sign any of the paperwork. But that's what he said. Now, there's either that did happen, or because I knew he was after the money. He wanted a stake in the house. He wanted a stake in my father's estate, and I didn't know anything about the identical twin being taken, so he would have felt like he would have had a stake or a credit in it. So what happened was he and so he ended up he ended up saying, "Don't sign the paperwork protecting my mother." And I had said this, but the reason I think is because he kind of gave me this weird look, like kind of like maybe you're trying to steal the money. And so, just like many other people that showed up, I don't know who else showed up into the picture. They wanted a stake. They wanted to say who was going to get the money, who was going to get my dad's because there was $175,000. The house was valued at $125,000. There was $50,000 of stock market cash and my dad was in a nursing home. So they knew about this. Now, initially when that happened, he looked at me kind of like, "Yeah, you're just trying to trick your mother." Because I didn't get along with him at all when he was in the house. I didn't talk to him or anything like that. We just didn't talk at all. And he ended up, just was taking his boots off, his shoes, and he told Jillian this, that some guy was trying to go in there and fill out some paperwork. so that they can never get sued. Taking strip, that's like the biggest violation you can do to a human being, because you're just after money when you do that. And um, anyway, she didn't sign any paperwork, and I told Julian the same thing. You can talk to Julian about this, because I told Julian, I said, be careful with mom, because there could be somebody who's going to show up. They don't want you. They're not going to want to give mom money at all, and they're going to trick her, and they're going to try to get her signed paperwork. And he goes, yeah, we made sure. He goes, yeah, Lucia told me some guy tried to walk in there into the room trying to get you to sign paperwork. Now, I do believe that he could have been lying. I don't know, and I think he could have been saying this, simply because since all the stake is at my mother's hands, and my mother gets become disabled, then who takes control? Who gets ownership and who makes decisions? And so this is a lot of money. Everyone's going to parasitically go after it. But it's such a heartfelt, tragic, selfish position of whoever was involved, that she ended up not signing paperwork. But I don't know. Still to this day, I don't know the details. I don't know whatever happened because I told my mom, why didn't you sue the company or whatever this is? And, they said that I think she said that she sued, but I was guessing that at some point, within a couple of months or a year or a couple of years, she signed some sort of agreement that was going to say, that she agreed to get paid, like, I think my mom said something like 30,000 or 40,000 or something like that. I don't know what it was. Now keep in mind, when my house got sold and my father died, there was absolutely no paperwork I signed. I just accepted what my mother gave me, and just to move on. And all that was because I was told by family members, oh, don't worry about her, just leave her alone, she'll be fine. And I was being pressured, and I was being thrown to the streets. I didn't know where to go, and I'm 18 years old. So my father dies, and I just accept. 2 years later, right after the accident, and that was it. That was the last of it. And I just try to rebuild my life. Now, I always felt sketchy and never believed much of this, because I remember my mother being at the apartment complex, and I drove there. There was a couple of months where I drove by and I'd see her car, and I'm like, is that my mom's car? That looks just like her car. And I remember seeing my mother one day, and it's hard to express right now because I feel really emotional. It's like a connection of a mother to a son, and a mother to her, a son to her mother. Like, there's nothing more precious in this world. And I remember my mother's body language, and I remember thinking, I was like, is that my mom? And she looked a little bit different. And when I say a little bit different, there was a sense of like, she looks a little bit different. Like, maybe she just got really healthy. And it was very weird, because I talked about this when I saw my mother over so many years and never knew she was a triplet, and said that, hey, you look healthier, you look better, you look different, you're healthier. And all of a sudden I had a shit. So I know that there were some other situations that were involved. And I still remember this. I still remember when I became homeless, and I was about 20. Gosh, I could have been maybe about 25 or 27. I was in my mid to late 20s. And I went over to my mom's boyfriend's house, and we parked on like a dark side of the curb, a few houses down. And I said, why come you're parking here? Oh, más estoy aquí porque Lucio, la familia se juntó todos y algo pasó la casa, algo pasó. I mean, something happened, and one of the brothers or the father died, and they were trying to collect money. And I remember looking at my mother, and I know how my mother acts when she's either nervous, like I just know what she's trying to interpret, or there's just something bad that someone's trying to take advantage of. But she didn't tell me any details. She just said, okay, let's just go. We were there for maybe 15 minutes just talking. I'm like, why are we just sitting here in the dark, like a curb? And it was just like, it felt like me and my mother were thrown to the streets. That's what it felt like. You know how like you ever hear these stories, like, your mother builds all this stuff, and her son's trying to help her, and all of a sudden we both get thrown to the streets, and my mom's now at the mercy of this guy. And I have no way, no money. The police officers already gave me thousands of tickets. I'm being harassed at my job sites, and I absolutely have no place to go. I have no money, no disability, nothing, and I have like $200, and that was the last of it. So, um, but anyway, and that was like in my mid 20s, but mid to late 20s. But as far as the accident goes, I think it's a possibility he could have lied. He could have lied. I don't know, but that's what he said, and that's what he told Julian. And I think he could have said that to Julian just so that maybe he can get, because what they're doing even to this very day is they're doing everything they can to turn me against my mother. Now, and to have Julian turn against me, Frankie turn against me, my own immediate family, and then they pay off whatever they want to pay off and steal whatever they want, and they make up their story because I'm the only storyteller about everything that ever happened. Majority of it, and that's why they went after me. So what happens is yeah, I just um, my mother gets uh, ran over by this forklift. She's I'm 20 years old. She's heals from it and she moves, and I never see her again. And it was so weird because when that injury happened, she was at our house for like, I think it was me, Julian, Marco, and Lucio, and my mom, and and that was it. That was, my mom was there for about 2 months. I say about 2 to 3 months, and then my mom just all of a sudden just got up and disappeared. Like she just got up, and she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go with Lucio now," and it was very suspicious because I was like, "You just," because she had just gotten her leg ran over. They finally moved the bars off her leg, and there it was still in the healing process, and my mom was on crutches. And for those that know, I think they had cameras on the house, in my opinion, because it was just very bad. And because my father was about to die and my mother was in a vulnerable state, and they wanted a stake in it. And this is what the whole issue was with me and my mom's boyfriend, is that my mom will lose all ability to speak on any behalf of herself and what happened in our family, and this guy just shows up and he's just like, "Oh, it's all mine, and my dad's gonna die." And so what ends up happening is, um, yeah, my mom just like got up and left, and it kind of abruptly, and she just like, it wasn't a goodbye or anything, and she just kind of left, and that was it. And then I stayed at the house, and then the future's what it is. Eventually, within a few months, I ended up leaving and moving with my uncle, and for a couple months, and I got my own apartment, and then that's when was there for about a year, and then my dad dies. So, but I need to say this. My Frankie moved out of our house when I was about 15 years old. Now I wasn't 16. I was either late 14, early 15 years old, because Frankie is 4 years older than me. And Frankie went to the Navy, or he said he went to the Navy when he was 19 years old. Frankie was 19 years old, and I was 15. So I was 15 years old when Frankie left, like almost on my birthday, or maybe even late 14. But I'm gonna say he was 15, exactly 15 years old. He ended up leaving because he registered to go into the Navy, and then that was it. So anything that ever happened in our family, Frankie was not a part of. Frankie didn't make phone calls. He didn't know what was going on. He just pretty much got up and left. Never heard from him again. And my dad had told me when in a nursing home when I was with him to write letters because he wanted to contact Frankie to find out what happened to the $50,000, because Frankie was the head son that was going to have that knew more about the information about the money and the property, the house. And I was in total infuriated because here you have all this money in this house, and now this house is free game for anybody who wants to take it. And my mother is a poor Mexican lady from Mexico with no education and all this horrific abuse, and now they got her pregnant, and we don't know the story. And they were trying to take I forgave him, but I forgave him a long time ago, but he was completely we were just, he was completely new that I knew I was defending my father and his estate and my mother's estate. And he was supposed to be the biological father. So if he turns out, I don't think he's a biological father. I don't think he is. And Julian knows this because I talked to Julian in the house about this. I said, I heard, I mean, you could hear him screwing my mother, and she still had the bars in her legs. And that would have drove him to be very paranoid. Like, oh no, I better do something or try to get her pregnant again so I have a stake in it, because then he feels everything that he's ever done isn't going to count for anything. And here, I didn't know that this guy is living in my house, that 10 years prior to him moving, me ever seeing this guy, he was the guy that took Julian's identical twin and took him wherever he is. So he did have credibility. I don't know, I don't think he communicated with my mom but very few times. So my mother was sort of scrambling like a mother is trying to find her lost puppies and reunite her children. And, but I needed to say this, that whoever it is that's going on, because that was it. But as far as when I was 20 years old, this is what happens. My father dies, and I've already put most of this all on video. When my father died, before my father was even buried, this is how bad it comes from the Cooper family. This is how bad it comes from the other side of the Palomo family. For those that don't know, Robert Palomo, which is BardenPalomo.com, he does royal weddings. He's a multi-millionaire. He has the last name Palomo, like I do, and my father. He was one of the 3 kids that my father first raised in the house that I grew up in before his wife died, and they grew up and moved out. Well, he has a wedding business in New York City, like a couple miles from the World Trade Center. And he was very successful. He does stuff for Oprah Winfrey, Raphael Lauren, Gucci. It's all rose. He even told me that he did royal weddings for like a princesses in India or something like that. But it's like, if you look at the furniture, they have like furniture that's like $20,000 for like a table, like $10,000 for some unknown person that made a chair or whatever. But when my father died, before my father was even buried, he told me, I'm going to hire a lawyer and I want you to find out what happened to that house. Because I had no money, and I had talked to him before right when my father died. I says, I want to find out what happened to it, because her boyfriend's going to steal this money, and the house is a total stake, and this guy's going to steal everything our dad had. And you don't understand that this guy's sort of jumping in the middle between me and my mother. And they wanted to make sure they was sort of targeting against me and my mother. And I know it seems like that, but that's not what my intention was. I wanted to, and I made that clear, I want to find out what the heck's going on. My mother and my immediate family did not go through this for somebody else's table and their money. So Robert Palomo hired a lawyer. He said that, this is how much money he felt comfortable in. Now, there's more stories to this. He was very kind in certain circumstances, but he said, don't worry. He goes, when I went into the lawyer's office, he got Kenneth from the radio station at 97.90 DJ Keynote to pick me up and go to the lawyer's office with me. So he was assisting to find out, and he could also be an open ear. And I remember very vividly being in that room, and the lawyer coming in, and he was talking to Kenneth, and he was talking to me. And he said, I've already got a call from Robert, and he said, money is no object. And I was like, whoa, like this is like a billionaire, someone saying, you know what, money is no object. We're going to get this right. We're going to find out the details to this, so whatever it costs to figure out what was going on, because if you only have so much money, you can only do so many things. No, this is to thoroughly from the beginning to the end. And so I began to say, this house, I think my mother is in a fight with this house. I think she and her boyfriend are going to want to take it, but my mother is sick. You don't understand my mother like I do. And he started saying all this fancy lawyer talk, and he started to say, he goes, yeah, you have to be very careful and make sure you get the contract, because then if you don't, like that, the money's gone, they'll deposit into their bank account, and then it's gone forever. And I remember being in there, and I started to almost faint. This is when I had aplastic anemia, and I remember being in there, and you could probably talk to Kenneth and look at him and tell him, and he'd probably tell you, if he was telling you the truth. If you had a camera in the room, it'll tell you. And I looked disoriented, like I was kind of zoning off, and I couldn't really pay attention. And I remember, I want to say I was with Kenneth walking back to the car, because we were only talking to this guy for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And eventually, after the conversation was over, I was walking, and I said, man, I think I need to go to the doctor, because plastic anemia had set in, and I was getting a lot of like rainbow colors, or not rainbow, like a lot of hue colors. Like the white didn't look white, the brown didn't look brown, the black didn't look necessarily black. The colors, the blue didn't look really blue. Like I physically was like the coloring to everything I was looking wasn't right. It something was wrong. So I remember saying that, and he could tell by looking at it. I remember him looking at me like he could tell I was kind of zoning off, like I was like, and I was kind of breathing heavy, and I kept on. And if there's cameras inside that lawyer room, you'll see me do that. So as we're walking to the car, I said, you know what? I said, it's just too much hassle, man. I don't think I want to do this. And you don't understand the position that I'm in. This is entirely going to make me look like I'm trying to go after my mother and just steal the money and take off and think that, and this is what they're going to try to make it look like. And this is not what this was going on. This is my mother, okay? So, that was it. And we didn't go back. And then like Robert calls me, I think it was like the next day or a couple of days later. My dad hasn't been buried, but he just died. And he says, he called me in a way someone had informed him, and I could tell by the way he was talking, like someone had just informed him new news. So I knew it had to have been either Sarah Cooper or someone in the Cooper family. It had to have been someone. And he was like, oh, you know what, Hector, just don't worry about it. Just leave it alone. You know what, just don't worry about it. Like all of a sudden, change of heart. Like something changed. I don't know, but I didn't question it. That was it. Funeral process, all that, and that was it. Yeah. And so what ignited a lot of this as well, and I talked about this, Joni, my mom's sister, who's straight and who's a transgender, Lupe, which is my other sister, who was very much a part of our life, showed up to the funeral, and they stood, they came in there, kind of gave their respects, and then left. And I talked about this. They were, both of them were kind of giggling, and they were kind of looking, and they looked very like approaching the stuff like I kind of went on the Palomo side or Robert's side, but I don't know anything. I just know I didn't want anybody to take anything what my immediate family had, my father and my mother, and I wanted some professionalism in this, and there wasn't. Frankie basically shows up, and it's just like, okay, let's just bury Dad, and that's a whole conversation about that with the talk we had. But I think it's important for me to talk about, because I'm very nervous about my mother right now, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on in this house, and a lot of stuff that is, I'm telling you right now, they are stripping my mother of every inch and corner that you can imagine. They are extremely intelligent about what they're doing to mutilate my mother, because they know my mother is in a very bad mental state where she cannot defend, and they want to claim that they're angels, and that's not what they're doing. And I'm not here to start pointing fingers, because I know I'm on camera right now and I've been saying this, but at this point there's probably enough cameras and people around to know someone else, but I just know I don't have the power. And I love my mother very dearly, and I think it's very important for me to talk about this, because it is hard to see that much pain and suffering and all the things that I went through for someone else to show up, and I didn't even count for any of it, and don't understand what Frankie went through and what I went through, and all of a sudden people just want free money. And my mother is such a loving and kind person that it's hard to describe. She's the best way I could describe it is like a poor village lady. A poor village lady that poured her heart into her family, into her own being. And they're just coming along and saying, no, we got money, we're just going to pay it off. No, Hector did this right here, we'll put him in his place. And then you see Hector's nice. You see, Frankie was over, he takes charge of power of attorney. We're just going to do this to Celestina. But at this whole time, I don't ever know about my mother's triplets. I don't even know about Julian's twin. And Julian's sitting there in the funeral home and he doesn't even tell me about his identical twin. I had no idea. He didn't tell me during the transfer. I mean, I right now to this day, I have Julian's blood, his identical twin's blood in my body. And there's no, he never told me. Like, the doctors never told me. Nobody told me that I had Julian's identical twin's brother's blood as well as me as well. And I never met my brother. It's weird for me to say that too. Like, I never met my brother. I have a brother I never met. Like, Julian's identical twin, I never met my own brother. I think, in my opinion, if Julian, identical twin, and Marco's twin, and me and Frankie got together, I think Frankie would have been ecstatic. I know Frankie would have been ecstatic. I would be like, oh, I know Frankie would have been like, cool. It's like, oh, it's like Julian's freak. I know his vibe. Frankie would have been like, man, that's cool. It's Julian's twin and Marco's twin. I was like, oh man. Like, he'd kind of be joking, like kind of jokester a little bit with that, and very delighted. But as far as my mother is, my mother went through her whole life. Like, my biological father was the only genuine relationship that I ever knew she had, where there was a mutual, he called, she came over. And I remember, I think he had a 6-pack. He had like a 6-pack of beer, like a Budweiser, Bud Light or something. Glass bottles. And I want to say he came over, or my mother had already gotten it, but I want to say he came over. But I remember this very vividly. And my mother, they got a beer, and they just got like a couple, like, my mother drank like a quarter of the beer, like a couple sips. And then they just kind of, and he looked at my mother, and you could tell they were just looking at each other like they were going to shack up. And so, and he goes like this, he goes, come on. And so they went to the room, and, adults do what they do, right? And that was it. But that was the only mutual relationship. And I do remember that 100% now. It was, my mother put me on the front porch when she saw, and she had the door open. She had me stand on the front porch when she saw my mom's boyfriend. I mean, my biological father. Because that's how my mother is. My mother was like, and I don't even know, like, the way that my mom says, I don't know how she said it. She didn't want to say necessarily es tu papá, like, because the father's already in the picture, right? Raymond Palomo. But she was kind of saying, mira, no, es tu papá. And she was just kind of looking. And mom was kind of just to see what he was going to do. Kind of mothers do that kind of stuff. And I remember that. And so, anyway, that was a story. So the way that Julian came into the picture is, I talked about this before. Me and my father, Raymond Palomo, and my mother went to go visit in Chihuahua, Monterrey, Cuauhtemoc. We went to Cuauhtemoc. We went to Chihuahua, through Chihuahua to get to Cuauhtemoc. I was to remember it being Chihuahua. But we went to Mexico to visit my mother and her family. And we all got raped. All of us. Except for my father. This is when Frankie got the worst of it with my grandpa. Brutally fucking raped. This is where the most heinous and disgusting sexual acts that you could imagine. What I saw when I saw that sheet and that curtain, behind that curtain, was horrific. It was blood. It was an orgy. It was an orgy of what they were doing to Frankie. I'm not kidding you. It was an orgy. I know this sounds very despicable, but one guy, they were both had their pants down, and Frankie was kneeling like a dog on a bed, and he was being penetrated, and he was having a penis in his mouth as he was crying. And I remember his face, and he was like crying. Like he had total no obedience to, he can't do anything about this, to what they're doing to him. And these two individuals, which was a grandpa that my mother has a picture of him with next to Bethel inside her apartment. And when we get back, we were only there for probably 2 weeks, and 2, 3 weeks at most. And when we get back to my grandma's house, my mother disappears for like several hours. And I'm a little child, I'm 5 years old. And I'm like, where's mom? Where's mom? And I don't, my mother, like, back in those days, like, you gotta imagine, they don't have plumbing. This is the poorest in Mexico. And there's a kitchen, there's running water. I don't even know if they had a refrigerator. I don't think they had a freezer. So when you bought food, and it was like a big, it was all gravel. Like, it's poor village. Like, it's a poor village. And there's rocks all over the ground. There's no streets. And, you have these sort of, few businesses and houses that people live at. And if you wanted fruit and meat, you got to cook it the same day, because they are the only ones that have a refrigerator. And so my mother said, oh, she went to go buy fruit, and she went to go grocery shopping or something like that. She disappeared. And when she came in, she was raped. Someone had, I don't know what happened, someone grabbed her. I don't know what it was, but someone grabbed her and raped the shit out of my mother, and she got pregnant. Because when we got back from Mexico, and I talked about this already, my mother thought she was pregnant within a couple of weeks or months. My father got a medical pregnancy test, and I was there right in front of my father. And my father, many years ago, you could probably ask my mother, Frankie could probably remember this, even maybe Julian. My father used to have a folded mirror, that, because my father, he started to wear contacts for a little while, but he didn't want it, so he bought the whole kit. And it was like a glass mirror he had in a little kit, and he could put his contacts in. And he had his pregnancy test, and it says you're pregnant. And so that's how Jillian came into the world. My mother was raped in Mexico, and we get to the U.S., and my father does a pregnancy test, and I was there. And he goes, yeah, I saw my mother's urine in a cup, and he did the whole test, and he goes, yeah, you're pregnant. And so one of the creepy things about this is that I remember him being proud and happy. And I remember looking over at my mother and, like, I think kissing my mother. My mother was standing over the sink like this. Like, her back, and she was just doing this, like. And she was just, like, washing dishes as she was standing over the sink. And she was just, like, sad, like. And she was just quiet, and she didn't say anything. So this behavior, this is what's really creepy about my father when this happened. Because I don't know when he started having sex with my mother, if it was from the very beginning, which my assumptions was. But, this is a very different time. The way that I see this is my father was probably doing this because he grew up in a time with so much racism. If you don't bend over, even if you're in the Navy, and give your asshole up and let somebody fuck you and have sex with you, or start going into the gay community to have sex there because they have all the money and all the treasures and everything, you're not going to be successful in life, period. You're never going to be successful. So this is one of the reasons that I think that my father had started to have sex, but I don't know if it was from the beginning, because my father told me this story hundreds of times. When my father got married to my mother, he carried my mother. Like, how, old-fashioned, how, they say it's tradition to carry your wife, to pick up your wife and carry her and walk through the door into the house. That's exactly what my dad did. He told me, he goes, yeah, I picked her up and I carried her and I walked her into the house in her wedding dress. So he did it back in those days. It was very common to hear those kinds of stories where the woman would be picked up in her wedding dress and she would walk into the house. And that's exactly what my father did. And he told me that story so many times. He goes, yeah, I picked your mom up and after you were married and carried her into her house. Like, it was a dandy thing, like you're the guy. And that was a tradition to a lot of old-fashioned kind of stuff. So this is like the 70s, right? And for those that don't know this, my mother fainted when she was getting married to my father. And Sarah Cooper, I think, saw this. I don't know who else of the family was there. Nan and Joe, I think, could have been there. When my mother was getting married, and there's pictures of my father's wedding. And he's wearing this brown tuxedo. And my mother fainted at the altar. And Ken Cooper rushed up very quickly because he was very close, and he caught my mother before she fell on the ground. And that's what he did. And that was it. But my mother fainted. They'll tell you that story. My mother fainted. She was in front of everybody. She was in front of the altar getting married. And you could look at the pictures, and my mother was completely disoriented. She was just kind of like overwhelmed. You could tell by looking, and they don't all tell me, but I don't know who was it, the first person that told me that my mother fainted, because my mother never told me she fainted at the wedding. She didn't tell me, even though we had the pictures in our house of it. I don't remember who it was that told me. I think it was after my father's death that one of them said, yeah, your mother fainted when she was at the altar. Like, she was getting married and she fainted, and before she fell completely to the ground, Ken Cooper rushed her very quickly and caught her before she fell. And so anyway, that was the circumstances. So, I talk about this because I it seems so desperate and so hopeless. But, I love my mother very dearly, and the horrible things that my mother went through and the advantages. There's too many celebrities and too many people of all chaos in the worst environments ever. And it gets discredited because they scummed me to the fucking ground. And it is because of the president. They could have stopped it. They could have helped it. They're going to keep making excuses and keep getting... There's just too many of them. They're all teaming up against it and mutilating my mother because she has the uterus that makes babies. And if I'm there to protect her, then they'll cut me off and turn it around me to make sure then they get control over her, just like they did, ultimately. And so I knew my mother's physical interaction when she came to talk to men, because I was around my mother so often. And I knew, like, my mother really didn't understand her life like foreplay. Like, she's trying to, because my mother had been prostituted and horrifically raped as a child, and she ran away from home. She was like 14 years old. The horror stories, this is like a Holocaust story. So, this whole, like, you talk to a girl and you try to, make her attracted to you, doesn't really exist so much with my mother. So I understood my mother as someone who is, like, I gotta survive and just make babies with a healthy person. And, like, it's not very, and with, security or something, but to make a family. So it was very much as when somebody approached to try to take something from her, especially her uterus, she had no choice. Because when I saw her get raped, and we were in Mexico, I watched her reactions when she came to the door, and I drew pictures of this already, where you could just tell that she was fully stimulated, but she doesn't understand, like, I just have sex and babies, and just sex and babies, and so I'm just a mother, I'm just a mommy, that's all I am, just a mommy, and that's just mommy. And so this is one of the things that threw me in a rage of anger, because the people that were getting involved doing this to my mother, they were victimizing my mother again to put it on their table, and that's what they did. And they just milked the time off, and it's horrific, because today and today and yesterday, I get more vivid pictures of, like, my mother's body language whenever I went through chemotherapy at 23 years old, and I was sitting in conversation with Susie, and what looked like three women that were sitting in one, they looked kind of like my mother, but I remember they were covering their face or something, what was going on. And I remember my mother's body language when she looked at me. I remember thinking, I said, it kind of looks like my mom. But I don't know how to properly interpret this. I felt crushed for a moment that it would possibly be my mother, because I wasn't sure. Because I could see my mother's body language, and it entirely was looking at me like, that's my baby boy. That's my son. That's my son. Like, and I remember her like this, like, that's my son, my son, my son, my heart, my son. Like, and I remember her like looking at me, and I know that a woman doesn't look at her son like you look at it like emotion, erratic emotion, like a mother watching her son die. Like, where's my son? Where's my son? And I felt crushed. I felt crushed for a moment, and I was like, that kind of looks like my mom a little bit. But I want to say she either had a hat on or a scarf, which I thought was very unusual, but she looked a little bit different. So I know that I think and believe that if I knew that was my mother, I would have said something. But I really do believe and think that either somebody put makeup on her or made her look different or had her put a scarf on so that I necessarily couldn't. Because let me tell you, when I was sitting at that dinner table and we're having lunch, I was so intoxicated and fucked up from the steroids and chemotherapy, and I had not had any sleep for about 5 days. I was petrified and traumatized from this disease and what I just went through. And it was very hard for me to carry this sort of conversation of normalcy because I was facing death and I was alone. And if there's cameras there, you will hear me say. And she said, and Susie said, well, what about your mother? And I said, she just moved. I don't want to bother her. She's just with her boyfriend. She's living and moving with her boyfriend. And I didn't want to get into conversation because I'm bald, I'm bloated, trying to finish my meal, trying to act normal from not shaking. I was shaking a little bit, like when I was trying to eat my meals, like shaking. And I was trying not to like project fear to Susie as well, Susie Molina. Even though she's rock hard, right? She's like rock hard, solid character. But I thought it was important for me to talk about. So it's very hard because psychology can always tell you the chess pieces of a chessboard, where to move. Oh, it's just fixed, and then whatever religion you want to put in your perception. But this is my mother. The entire story and experiences get all accumulated to an understanding that's very different than what you think was a good decision, and it wasn't. And you did it with that intention of harm. Whoever it was, the psychologist, my mother would have not looked at me that way if it was her and been sort of shaking or like, because she kind of like jittered like I was connected to this person, like I was from this person, I am from this person, like this person has, like I'm a piece of their soul or something. But at that time, I'm telling you, she was 20 feet away from me, 20 to 25 feet at a table. And I want to say there was two other women. There was three of them. And two of them were facing, I don't know, because it was so long ago. And, I could only see one of their faces. And they all looked up to be about the same height. And they looked like a group of girls, a group of women. Kind of like twins would behave toward one another. And, but I thought it's important for me to talk about, to elaborate this even more. I feel very, very traumatized and hard to describe in words what the desperation that I feel, because it's like this sort of suffering and these things that my mother wanted me to do and wanted me to do, and what she wanted to do for me was completely seared of fucking just someone else's selfish and greed, and told her what she was going to do. If she was very dull, she wouldn't behave like that, because remember, she already had a daughter that died. So when my mother looks at me, she sees, just like when I look at my mother's twins, I see a little bit of my sister who passed away. I see, like, I can, they're not just genetics, but like, I don't know, you want to call it spiritual. I see my sister a little bit. And the way that sort of functions is that when my mother sees me, she's like, I already had my daughter die. Now my only son is not going to die. But she understands that Frankie came into this world neither in a relationship, to my understanding. My mother, I don't believe, picked who my biological, Frankie's biological father. I think she was probably also raped and probably thrown in a room and then fucked and pregnant and say, okay, we're going to give you money and babies. And then that's it. This is very different than from just going on a one night standing to get pregnant. My mother's so vulnerable, the way that she approaches sort of this sort of sexual behavior of like there isn't foreplay. It's almost kind of like, oh, like, oh, kind of like, because I remember, being 16 years old and walking into a rehab center, and she has to go to meetings every twice a week with me. And there was a nice guy that used to do a lot of speeches, and he was kind of Mexican guy. I didn't know the guy was gay, but my mother sort of was attracted to him, and I was very nice, and I'm like good looking. I'm 16 years old, and I'm talking to my mother, and I'm sort of guiding her. And my mom used to like going to these meetings with me, these counseling meetings, because it gave her a chance to get out of the house, be active, and do other things. And so when we go there, I sort of introduce her to this guy, and I wasn't selling my mother, to make that very clear. I was sort of just like, well, there's an opportunity. And my mother was like, oh, no, it's okay. No, Kitty. And I remember him looking at my mother and goes, like, he was like, no, like he was gay. Like, he's not interested. Like, he was just a good speecher guy, right? Helping teenagers. But I remember that. And I remember my mother kind of walking like, oh, no, Kitty. And my mother didn't feel pretty. Like, oh, you know how a woman gets let down, she doesn't feel pretty because a guy put her down. Like, he approached her, talked to her, and he just kind of, and he didn't say, like, to say, Matt, I don't think you're attractive. It was just kind of like, no, like, he was 100%, he's like, he's not, he's gay, he's not, and we were in the car with my mother, and my mother goes through this emotional phase. Her eyes didn't cry or anything, she was just, I could tell she just didn't feel like, oh, she was trying to be a woman, feel beautiful. So I think it's important for me to discuss this. So, whoever it is that's this sort of elaborating in this would be aware of this, because I don't have any control. The keys and the power belong to someone else, but at least I'm, as her son, I can elaborate the best way that I can and make this the best situation for my mother, because if I'm no longer here, if something happens to me, I love to believe, and I like to believe, that God would say thank you for helping your mother when all these people were not, and at least for the suffering that your mother went through in her life that was very awful to a degree that these people have no idea. You tried to identify in the ways that you could speak and elaborate in your education to help your mother, because they didn't, and you did a great job, even if it never counted for anything in the ways that it should have. My effort was there. Can't do anything about the president showing up and shitting in my mother's mouth, telling his people to come after me and my mother and the money and all this, and organize it with the gays. Nothing but my efforts was the best way that I remember my mother when I was younger. It's a lot of pain and suffering for a mother to go through. It's a lot of pain and suffering for a mother to go through. It's just really bad, and you don't understand, because all the way up to my transplant, I was like, I'm telling Frankie, what happened to the house, what happened to the money, like, what the heck's going on with mom, but why is nobody saying it? I don't know the story to it, to what was going on with Frankie to this day, but I say this because, in my opinion, I know for a fact they're going to want to put Frankie in first charge of everything, and they'll do this very specifically because they can control my mother and shun everything that ever happened. And it's because he's gay, and because I'm straight. That's exactly why. So I think it's important for me to discuss this, because my mother's life will never get told, and it get told the way the president wants it, and he's ordering. You don't understand how worthless your life is. When people talk about the Holocaust, where you see a Nazi soldier, Barack Obama, George Bush show up, and a Nazi soldier doesn't like, because you're a fucking, you're a Jewish person. He's a Nazi, he's killed 400 fucking people before. Yeah, go hang her children. Nazi power. This is Nazi Germany. And does it with such joy and fashion that it's terrifying that a human being does that. That's the impression. That is 100% the impression, and how ruthless these people are. People are dying all the time. People are suffering all the time. People don't care about one another all the time. When you put Michael Jackson on a table and you put money and you put no education on there, what do you think they're going to use it for? Political power and advantages for themselves. You're always going to be grateful for the crumbs that you're going to get, because those crumbs then turn into huge treasures of amounts of food to eat, because you never got what you really deserved and you only understood that little amount. Why there are Ferraris and Lamborghinis, everything, and enjoying the qualities of intelligence and understanding of the world that we live in. So, if you're starving to death and you get a cookie, that cookie is unbelievable. But if you have a refrigerator full of foods and $1 million, how good is a cookie then when you're always eating lots of cookies all the time and have plenty of food? You want to get something else. It's not treasurable. You savor your food better. Not just better, but you savor your food, and which could be worse, because that's what they want. You don't have anything. You get thrown a piece of meat. Yeah, it's treasurable, and that's like what they did to me. They corner you. You have no choices. Throw them some trash. You see, it was just trying to use tactical religion, tactical intelligence of political power. Blame it on the president, direct it toward the president. No, I'm going to do this. No, it's because let me explain smarter than you. No, let me explain over here smarter than you. No, this is what really happened. The dominance of real force power. No, this is exactly, and it's all lies. But there is no one that's going to care. For me, it's just that I tried. That's the number one key, that I said something and I tried. I did, and I had that, because there's so much ammunition and so much military shit that's going on against me and tactical shit. My efforts is just that I tried. I tried my best, and I'm doing it the best way that I remember my mother would have wanted me to elaborate. If I had the ability to speak much more formal and directive and great patterns for my mother, then that's what I should do, because I remember her. That's what she wanted me to do. Now, they're going to pick out all the other shit that's going on with me and my mother, when me and my mother used to get into arguments every once in a while. And I'd be screaming at my mother, like, oh, Mom, like, my dad's dying. Like, why are you trying to take his money? Or what's going on? I'm like 14 years old, I'm 13. And I'm smoking weed and shit. Oh, Hector was a bad person. I know he would. Look, he was just drug addict and stealing money. I knew he was. Look at his behavior. It's just a different time then. Remember, they're always smarter. They're always smarter again. And they're always smarter in conversation. And they're always better at chess playing. And they're always at determining smarter tactics, finalize answers that completely seal off everything. So I'm just here to have this conversation. But my mother, if it turns out that, which I very strongly believe, I still don't know who the biological father is for my mother. My mother was just being raped. Because Frankie, the biological father, this guy, I don't know who it was, but my mother was raped. You got to understand, there's no education. If my mother learned how to read a few words when she married my father, because my father and my mother used to tell me this. My mother told me that my father, Raymond, he was educating my mother, and he was trying to teach my mother how to read and how to do math. And that's how my mom learned, because my mother had no education at all. Like, she would say that she went to the 3rd or 4th grade in school just so she would have some sort of confidence to saying to me when because I remember, like, and I get these visions when I'm talking about. I remember sitting at Employee Solutions many years ago, and this is I want to say this was before. This is before her accident, because my mom was filling an application, and I was sitting next to my mother, and she was writing her education, and she said, "No, yo fui como el 3rd grade." Sí, no, it's el 3rd grade. And so she has this, like, I have value of intelligence. I have value, and the lady at the front desk says, did you go to school? And he goes, yeah, I went to school like 5th or 6th grade. But you got to understand, my mom's efforts when she talks to this lady at Employee Solutions, and this is like 10 years prior to her accident or ever working there. It was at the same place, and I was next to her filling an application, and she didn't know how to fill an application. I was helping her, and I was like, Mom, what are you writing in for third grade, Mom? I said, Mom. And I remember my mom getting upset at me, like, you're supposed to be helping me, not put us, you're my, and my mom, I remember getting like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna make this happen, we're gonna make life happen. And but I remember her getting up to the front desk, and she said, I went to fit, and this lady was entirely looking at my mother like she was stupid, like, you didn't finish anything, you're stupid, you're dumb. Or like, I used to always see that with my mother. Adults would do that to my mother. Like, you don't know any better. You don't know any better. You don't. This is education. Barack Obama, George Bush. I do the killings when I need to do the killings. That's all I am. I'm angel work when angel working is just phenomenal. I win again, smarter than you. I know what love is. It's bullshit. But I'm telling you, I've experienced it so often where I'd always be looking at my mother just the same way I was looking at my father when he would be drunk, or my father was really old, and I'd tell my father, hey, that guy was looking at you at the mechanic shop really crazy. He was like, I think he's going to do something to you or something. And I could see how they were taking advantage of the circumstances. I'd tell my dad that. I was like, hey, I think the guy's he's kind of looking at you weird. He's kind of looking at you like he's going to do something. I don't know. Like, he's looking at you when you were looking away. And my dad said, he did? Because my dad had Coke bottle glasses and shit when he was, throughout his life, real old-fashioned kind of. But I'm elaborating this because it's just my efforts. And then they came and killed me. And then my mom was watching me. I think it was her twins and my mother. And I remember when I saw the three women standing there, they all were looking at each other like they were triplets. I'm not kidding you. When I looked at them, I remember thinking to myself, because how women act toward one another, they looked all connected. They looked like if you put triplets together and you would watch them, how they interact with one another, that's what it looked like. And they were synchronizing, like they were connected, like their souls were connected. It was weird. I mean, I remember thinking, because they looked very bonded like with one another, very bonded like. And but I thought it was important for me to say this. Hopefully, it helps. But my efforts is just to let go and do the best I can say, because I'm not in control. It's very hurtful for me because you don't have anything more. You realize you don't. When you get older, you have less in life of the even like. I always knew this from the beginning, but you have less in life that you're concerned about mere materialistic things, because they really don't have any value to it. They have value to it when you're younger, because you get a woman, you get to look cool in front of people, fashion, look more comfortable. When you get older, death, and especially when you have a disease, you think, what do you think is going to be more important to God? All this material things, physical, it all leaves. Like, it's just material. And it makes the world the way that it is and better, but in the functions, the basic functions of life, but that doesn't stay. It's, your mother and your father and your brothers, that is forever. That has an internal essence to God, Lord, to the, if one that does exist. I do have faith that it does, and I always will have faith that it does. Even if I was wrong, I'm supposed to always 100% have faith. All that is what the interaction was. All that. With, it wasn't any materialistic. I understand that. So, when you strip that, and I see like my mother, because like I saw like the two girls that were facing her, they had their back against me, and my mother was looking. I could see that one of them was very nervous and was like telling her to, like, it's okay, calm down. And like my mother looked like she wanted to say like it's my son. But you got to understand that even if an emotional state of a human being is in that state, imagine if you don't like the culture and the background of what my mother had. Like you're a poor village lady, like the Virgin Mary. You know, all you have is your clothes and the connection you have with your children. The materialistic things don't have any like connection or value to that. It is entirely like the life of child that you gave. And so how does that make my mother interact with, okay, I had my child die, I had to throw this one away because she was getting hit with a belt, and it's time for money now. You want a place to live, I have to get rid of this child. And so I know that they're going to try to put my mother into a mental state that she's just sick, and I don't think that she's sick mentally. This is a way of survival. The way that I understand it looks like, one thing I wanted to talk about this video is my mother told me once, and Robert knows about this, and Robert Palomo, I talked about this in a video before, that he showed up and my dad gave me a VCR, and it was after I met Michael Jackson. I don't know, I was like 7 years old, anywhere between 5 to 7 years, but it was after I met Michael Jackson, or right around that time. I was very young, and Robert Palomo came over in a brand new car. It was black. It was like a Pontiac, I want to think. It was like 4-door and leather interior. It had like LCD, and it was like fancy. And back then, if you had a car like that, you were like driving like a Porsche, you know, like you were driving like a Mercedes or a Lexus. And I remember he let me come look at his car, and I was leaning over the car. Inside, I was like, oh, wow, you got all this cool stuff. So before he leaves, my dad gives him a VCR, and he goes, here, let me give you a VCR, son, because my dad tended to want to give you something before he left. So he wanted to give him something. But in that conversation that he was there talking for about an hour, he was sitting next to my dad, and they were talking, and he told my dad, he goes, yeah, well, Dad, let me tell you something. When you were at the bar one day, I got raped. And he had said he got raped. One day, I don't know, he took him to a bar, or one day when my dad was drinking and he wasn't around, there was a guy that raped viciously Robert Palomo. It was in New York, and he was just a kid. And so I remember hearing that, and I remember I repeated that. He gave him a VCR when my dad died, when I was 20 years old, and he looked at me very quickly because he remembered he had told, and he was like, damn, I wonder if he remembers and knew that my dad told him. You know, like I told my dad that, I wonder if he remembers. But I remember him seeing that. But anyway, I'm 5 years old, and I went about my business, you know, whatever. Dad passes away at 20, but keep in mind that when I'm about, I don't know, 9 or 8 years old. Now, I don't know if my mother heard this. She could have, because my mother was never really in the living room. When she'd always stay in the kitchen, like stay in her corner, right? Stay where she's supposed to stay. And my mother looked at me, and you got to understand, my mother's in a frantic situation that she does not want some other guys or some other people to take the ownership of her family and say, no, I'm going to tell you what you're going to get. And then I feel emotional connection better with them than I do with my own mother, because they're going to buy the interest of money, the interest of whatever it is that they have to offer that's greater than my mother, because my mother has nothing to give but be mommy, remember? And my mother kind of leans over to me and says, yeah, ¿sabes qué le sí? And she kind of goes into her own place a little bit. And she looks at me, and I'm a little kid. He goes, sí, ¿sabes qué le pasó? Sí, le hizo algo y se le estaba saliendo pus. And she says that pus was coming out of his rectum. And he was having symptoms, but I don't know if this happened. I don't know if she could have just said this because she's telling me this because she wants to help sort of degrade him so that he's nasty. No, I'm your mommy. I'm your mom, okay? I have to have somebody because my mom's nobody. Remember, everyone hates you in this world. You're just some bastardized wetback from Mexico that doesn't have an education. You're just good for your pussy hole and just good for you making babies, and then that's you love and mommy. No, but that's the way they think, right? So, to me, I don't see that as my mother's sick because she let Frankie get raped. That wasn't it. No, you don't have a choice. If you don't go along with it, you're not going to get anything in life. You want to survive? I'll protect you afterwards. I'll comfort you afterwards. It's just too much power and control that somebody can do harm. So allow the rape to happen. she just can't do anything because what are we gonna go? We have no money. We have no place to go. You know, like I have to ensure that Frankie's safe for now, or I made some kind of effort, but I couldn't save my son completely. He got raped anyway. So it's just kind of like, it's just kind of like when my mom was showering me and Frankie after the rapes, the tub was full of blood. It was fucking full of fucking blood and feces. Not full of feces, it had like crumbs of crap in it, but it was full of fucking blood. And my mother, I remember washing me and my brother, and she was just like, the way her action is just like, these fucking guys just, they don't know any better. We're trying to live, and she's like washing our butts and trying to put soap on us, you know, and washing my hair. You know, I'm trying to clean my sons up. We have a family. So this is what she's doing. The reason that you have to allow this is because you have no choices. You don't have, there's no law enforcement. You have so many people coming at you and you have no education. You're in desperation. Remember, this is the 80s. This is the 90s. She already had, you know, she's already built up in a condition that's very bad. This is poor village life. This is poor village life. They only see her as a reproductive organ that you could just make babies, and you see how love works, and that's about life, and you see, and then you see, and we to give you money, take care of Marco and the twin, and we love you more, and they just look at Hector. Oh, we didn't mean accidents happen, now kill him. Or you see, it's just, you know, I didn't mean that. You want President Barack Obama or George, but you know, it's like you have no choice. You almost have to kill your own child if you want to live another day. How much life do you like? How much do you appreciate life? Do you love it enough to be able to get rid and throw away a child so you could live and save these couple? Hey, that's real smart. You see, you know, Barack Obama, George Bush, you know. And it's very difficult. My mother's so nurturing and caring, but it still crushes me to this day when I get these visions in my head, watching my mother, like, between the house and my sister and how she couldn't touch her child. It's very crushing to me. Like, she kind of goes into this kitchen cooking, into her place of thinking of her child. Like, it's just sad. Like, it's sad that something like this is even happening in this environment and it's being allowed. But remember who's really in charge. No one is. The bad people are. And so, like, things like, I remember many years ago, I don't have too much time more left on this video, but I remember my mother sitting on a couch, and so she sometimes would maybe put other people down. And it was the sense of, like, to try to gratify, because they see, my mother knows that you've degraded her so much that she has to find another cheap way of value. And it's a cheap, I would say it's a cheap way of value. It's just because you don't have an education in the way that people, what they did to you, and that's why. And my mother was sitting on the couch, and she was like, ¿Qué lo hacen? Esos negros tan con los jetons. Y goes, ¿Qué le dicen? Nigger. And she does it just like that. And I remember looking at my mother, and I'm thinking, like, how educated I am compared to my understanding of, you know, it's just kind of like, who do you think has more value? Justin Bieber or a poor village lady? Look who's making music and has money and looks good and like a model and just clean cut. If you were to try to see somebody put down a celebrity and they have nothing in their scum, that sort of, and I'm not saying my mother's scum, I'm saying what that interaction of what that looks like. Like, this is royalty. You think you're going to say to President Barack Obama or George Bush? I'm going to tell you, you know, tell you who really the boss is and who has a better quality of standing in life. But you could see the efforts of my mother trying to sort of retain this value, and I'm telling you, it's not because of what you think it is when it comes to just being mean and evil. No, it's because you're just, these impressions and understandings are much more greater what other the family knew, and this is what made me so mad, because I understood them and I could defend, and they wouldn't let me. And I'm 42 years old, so I have to make another video, maybe some other time.